put it in quotation marks, the great breakup. You got off to a tremendous start with this band, with your older brother and with two others with whom you'd gone to middle school, junior high school. So the band gets off to a great start. Then you have this breakup. I started to say in brief, but it's complicated. But what happened with the band breakup?
I maybe know a little bit more now after, was it 50 years or something? I know that internally, within me, I felt like everything was going great. Somehow the songs that I would imagine would come to pass. We'd go in the studio and record them, and then lo and behold, they'd be on the radio, you know, and then we'd go play for audiences that were enormous, and everyone was happy and having a great time. Eventually it meant we could buy a house, you know, all that sort of thing. I do know that I didn't understand it at the beginning, and it didn't even register what the emotion was. It was much later, after I'd known Julie, you know, and as a couple tends to get to know each other over dinner and movies and riding in the car, you know, I mean, years went by, and one day she said, well, they were jealous. And I had never really even stopped to think of it that way. I mean, I just didn't understand. I will go back in time now to early 1969. Proud Mary was already a hit. Bad Moon Rising was out and was on the radio and doing well. And we were rehearsing to do the next single, which was a song called Green River. So we were done rehearsing for the day. We came out with carrying our guitars. We were each getting in our own car to go away. And suddenly my brother Tom says, you're getting quite a repertoire. But he didn't say it in a happy way. It was almost like it was hissed through clenched teeth. And I could tell he was angry, or there was something wrong, and because of the way it was coming at me. And I just sort of didn't understand, right? And so then as time would go on after that, I would hear comments every once in a while, especially like walking through an airport and a little kid had come running over with a piece of paper. Oh, John, can I have your autograph? You know, and oh, sure. You know, we're all walking together, and I'd sign the kid's autograph, and then he'd run away. And I'd hear for the next 30 feet behind me, grumble, 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 you know, a bunch of just negative, but I didn't quite understand what.
Well, fair to say.
That cloud, or that whatever, that broil seemed to get bigger and bigger.
And then fair to say that you went into a life spiral. Would that be too strong?
No, that's very much what happened.
Well, you tell me what happened. The band breaks up. You have your dream. Not only is it a band, but it's a very successful band, making money for the first time, real money for the first time.
Right, all of us, because, yes. And by the way, you said it right. It was my dream, meaning I thought I had discovered the formula. This is how this works for us. Right. Because we had been around each other for quite a few years. So I never looked at it as me against them. There were times when I would have to fight for a certain song, let's say, because I thought that was the best way. So the breakup was very upsetting, certainly.
So then what happened to you?
The first thing that happened was I made an album of country songs, and it was called the Blue Ridge Rangers. And right around in that time, I learned that the other three had been let out of their contract.
Right.
And I thought that meant if the band broke up, then we weren't under contract anymore. But sort of a big event happened. I made this album of pretty much country songs, and it was me playing all the instruments, doing everything. When it was done, and it was just about to be put out, one of the henchmen at the record company wanted to have a meeting with me, and he informed me that, I had this big obligation of recordings that I owed them. And he informed me that they weren't going to count that album that I had just worked for a few months on. I said, what do you mean you're not going to count it? Why? Because it's country. And so that just sort of blew my mind, just exploded what? Meaning I was trying to kind of play ball with this enormous obligation of recordings that I owed them. And again, remember the other fellas in the band had been let go from the contract. But that statement kind of, they had the power like willy-nilly to just say, oh, this one counts, this one doesn't. Yeah. I could see myself there for the rest of my life. And so I called a meeting with the people at the record company, but it was really just the man, Saul Zaentz. And he was so unsympathetic in listening to me that I'll just say it. We sat down. He had all his henchmen there, and I was there alone. And after a couple of little, how you doing and all that, I said, I'm finding it very hard to make music, to produce anything. This contract is just so like a big weight on me. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but I'm sure I was fairly colorful. So I'm just sort of being squashed by this contract. I don't feel very musical. And Saul Zaentz immediately says, that's not true. The whole history of art shows that the greatest art is produced in conditions of depression and oppression. And I mean, that was kind of the, what do you do? Where do you go from that? So
well,
I
you
left.
Went from there, you eventually broke with the record company.
Yes.
You eventually got out of it.
Well, I didn't get out. I just had to go away and go home and be quiet and not make any music.
Tell me, was this the low point in your life?
Well, it wasn't very pretty, that's for sure. And they call the phrase sinking into depression. That's what it was. It was day by day, it got worse. It wasn't like boom and then you're there. It was kind of, the next day after that, I couldn't believe it. I started seeing lawyers, oh, help me with this. And every time I'd show them the contract and they'd look it over, how all that stuff with lawyers goes. And then the bad news is, no, I can't do anything about this. Basically, they own you. What that meant was I couldn't go anywhere else. Right. If I was going to make any music, I had to give it to them. That was the law, even though they'd made all that money off of me already. And to make matters worse, they had gotten us into this tax what do they call it? Offshore tax shelter scheme, and we all lost all our life savings in it. So I was pretty much broke and couldn't make any more music unless I gave it to them. So I was in a word, I was unhappy.